Prior to transfer to Bridgewater, my race or ethnicity were never questioned. I think part of it has to do because I didn't have the opportunity, because everywhere I was, most of the people that I interacted with looked like me. And the church that I go to were mostly people that speak the same languages as me. The food that I ate, the media, the radio that I listened to, the media that I consumed, and even most of the friends that I had were the same ethnicity. Although there were other races or other ethnicity around me, to me they felt like the other, more so the minority around me. Because everywhere I go or places that I was, it seems like most people that look like me. All that changed when I transferred to Bridgewater. From that transition period to the crossroad of figuring out who I was, the understanding what it means to becoming a black person in a larger context, but also the self-authorship of making questions that wasn't looking for the validation of my parents. So the first one is really the transition. When I first got to Bridgewater, it was the first time where I felt like I really understood the terms minority. And the building that I stayed at, it feels like I could literally count the number of people that look like me in one hand or in my hands. And going to classes also felt the same way. So it was the first time that transition period was really tough. And to make it at the crossroad where it was the first time in my life as well where choices weren't made for me or made by my parents. I make the choices as far as the schedules and the routine that I created wasn't predicated on what my parents was doing. For example, on the Sundays, if my parents were going to church, it wasn't the question if I'm going or not. If they're going, I am going. I'm also going to church. But to realize is that for the first time, I had the choices of whether if I wanted to go or not. But also within that crossroad is the idea of understanding and really explore the idea, what it means to be black. And the author talks about the term negrescence, which defined as the process of becoming black. And I think in that aspect for me, the word negrescence remind me of the Haitian word that says neg, which translate as man. And I was becoming a man in an aspect where I wasn't making choices based on of the validation of my parents, but I was making choices that I wanted to make. And negrescence, the process, I was becoming a black person in the environment of it, predominantly exploring the side of being a black person in a predominantly white institution, but also becoming a man, because for the first time I was making choices that I wanted to make without the approval of my parents. But also it's the idea of self-authorship. What I've done as well is, prior to that, my major was business, was because it was something my advisor suggested, and I changed my major to communication because it's something that I wanted to do, and not because it was an advice. It's that I chose to do that. And becoming the author of my own choices, of my own life, and making the choices for me and the people that I searched to help me out, the advisor that I had was specific to my needs rather than what I needed to do. So in all this aspect, to move from that transition to live in an area that was very diverse, to go to a predominantly white institution, to move to that crossroad of figuring out who I was now, not just my ethnicity wasn't questioned, but rather my race in the larger context or society at large. And also to move to becoming a man, but also a black man. And I guess also the most important is the self-authorship of, by the end of that experience, that I made choices that I wanted and not the choices that I thought was best for my parents, but choices that was best for me.